So, in addition to Savimbi, who led UNITA, there was also the FNLA, which was led by Robert Holden Robato, Holden Robato, who had actually been on the CIA payroll as early as the 1960s, and he was based out of what was called Zaire under Mobutu Sese Seko, and it's now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So the final liberation organization in Angola was the MPLA, which was led by Agostinho Neto at that time. And as Portugal's empire collapsed in Africa, in Angola, there was contestation for power by these three liberation organizations. Ultimately, UNITA and the FNLA were supported by the West, by the NATO countries, and they actually had the MPLA cornered, and they might have actually been able to win and impose a neo-colonial government in Angola. Cuba came to the rescue at the 11th hour. Castro sent artillery pieces and thousands of troops to rescue the MPLA and to secure the capital of Luanda, and the MPLA was able to declare the first government in Angola. Cuba came to the rescue a second time in Angola in the late 1980s. At that time, UNITA, with United States support, Ronald Reagan supplied him with Stinger missiles, so he was able to take down Angolan government airplanes and helicopters and advance significantly. And he was also backed by South Africa, which invaded and occupied parts of Angola. And they were heading toward the capital. And Fidel Castro once again made a decision to halt that advance and went beyond that. He sent reportedly as many as 30,000 soldiers with artillery pieces once again and with aircraft. And reportedly, he was commanding the combat from Cuba by satellite phone and other equipment. And the Angolans and their Cuban partners were able to defeat UNITA as well as South Africa's army in Angola, which was mind-boggling to South African soldiers because they'd been reared on this apartheid white supremacist notion that white soldiers could never lose in combat to non-white soldiers. So it was shocking, and it had far vast beneficial consequences came out of that defeat. Number one, South Africa withdrew not only from Angola, but also withdrew from what is now Namibia. South Africa called it Southwest Africa. It had occupied Namibia since 1915 during World War I and had run it as a colony of South Africa. And why did South Africa withdraw? After the defeat on the battlefield, South Africa realized that apartheid could actually be defeated. The system of racist segregation and exploitation of the African majority and other non-white communities in South Africa. South Africa realized that if Cuba were to partner with a few other African countries, they would actually be able to invade South Africa and defeat the apartheid regime on the battlefield. So what did South Africa do? South Africa, in addition to allowing Namibia to become independent after it fled Namibia, and the Southwest Africa People's Organization called SWAPO was able to create a government run by Africans in Namibia with Sam Nujoma, Nujoma, who was the first president. What else did South Africa do? South Africa released Nelson Mandela after 27 years of incarceration in 1990, which is also the year that Namibia won its independence. And of course, in 1994, Mandela became the first African president of South Africa. And that to me was the real independence of South Africa. All the period where it was run by a white minority regime that had disenfranchised Africans, that can never be referred to as an independence era in South Africa. And then finally, in what is Guinea-Bissau, Guinea and then Bissau, that was the other Portuguese colony that a war of national liberation was waged by an organization called the PAIGC, led by the great intellectual, teacher, scholar, and freedom fighter, Amilcar Cabral, Amilcar, Cabral, Cabral, and all these individuals, I encourage you to look them up and read some of their writings as well. Cabral said famously that we are not military men. We are armed combatants. And what did he mean by that? That at the end of the war, people would go back to their regular jobs, teaching, farming, whatever other profession they're engaged in. They were armed nationalists, armed intellectuals, armed freedom fighters. They just wanted to end colonialism in their country. Unfortunately, the Portuguese secret police, working with African collaborators, assassinated Amilcar Cabral before independence, but it did not drive the drive for independence. And Guinea-Bissau ultimately also won its independence. So Portugal has had a long history of exploitation in Africa, dating back, as we saw today, to the 16th century. And you get a feel of some of the later episodes of the podcast. Once we're done with the early history stage, we will indeed have many podcasts that will be dealing with the colonial era, the independence struggle, the post-independence struggles, and ultimately we will come to the contemporary era. But let's make a few more trips into the history pages of Africa before we come to the contemporary era. So next week we will look at the kingdom of Mutapa, Mutapa, Mweno Mutapa is also called, in the region of southern Africa, primarily what is today Zimbabwe and other surrounding regions. The books that I refer to in this podcast, I will repeat the one I already gave you early on, The Portuguese Period in East Africa by Justus Strandes, Justas, last name Strandes. The Groundings with My Brothers, highly recommend, by Walter Rodney, Rodney. General History of Africa, Volume 3, Africa from the 7th to the 11th Century. Editor is I. Hebreck. Last name is spelled Hrbek. African People in World History by John Hendrik Clark. Hendrik is Henrik, Clark, Clarke. And finally, African Kingdoms by Basil Davidson, Basil Davidson, Davidson. I am your host, Milton Alimadi. I encourage you to let other sisters and brothers know about the African History Club. That will allow us to build more support and give us the capability to enhance our production and perhaps include other images, photographs, and other video as we continue with this narrative. I look forward to joining you again next Monday. Stay strong, stay healthy.